right, I'm here today with Tiara Sisson, Director of Employee HR and HX at HYAS. And we're going to talk about performance management and some of the insights, tips, tricks, I guess, trends that are happening in the market at the moment. And it's going to be an interactive session. So, Tiara, you and I have known each other for about a year, 18 months now. And whenever we're on the phone, we tend to get into some various debates trying to fix the world on different topics. And that's how it came about. As I guess, Tiara, you've always struck me as someone passionate, engaged, really committed to, I guess, employee improvement, making things as good as they can be for your employees, and you actually care about what you're doing. And that's how we got onto the topic of performance management, because that's been something close to your heart recently at HYAS, hasn't it?
It absolutely has been. And yeah, it's been great having this experience with you, or as you said, try to solve the problems of the world, so to speak. HR is very close to my heart, and I've been doing it for a number of years now, shall we say. And yeah.
And I know with your current company, HYAS, you actually have developed and implemented a new performance management program that you've put into place recently. Could you give us a bit of an overview on how that came about, and I guess just a high-level view on what you did?
Sure, absolutely. So HYAS, first of all, is a SaaS-based business company, and we are a startup. I've been with HYAS for about 3 years now, and we've seen different evolutions of HYAS. And as we have grown, we've found the need to really think about what's going to be important for our employees, what's going to make them stay with us, and how can we ensure that they are getting a robust experience overall. So performance reviews that were done in the past, like pre-me and post-me, were simplistic, as it were, and it really didn't capture where people's thought processes were in terms of their career growth and development, but also it didn't allow us to drill into what we needed. You know, when you're in a technological environment, typically people are always heads down doing their coding or whatever, and you don't really tend to drill into where they want their futures to go. And we really wanted to create an environment where there was transparency and have folks feel like the company cared about them beyond just their day-to-day, slogging through during their work. So that's how this evolution of a performance review came about. I have to say to you off the bat, there are no secret tricks or anything like that when it comes to performance. What's really important is the marriage between what are the company's goals and strategies and objectives, and aligning your employees to that, and also helping them to see their place in it and helping them with their career development.
How did you find it with, I guess, stakeholder buy-in from senior leaders within the organization? Mm-hmm. How was that process for you?
Well, so I think sometimes when you're in really large companies, there can be quite a distance between senior leaders and frontline employees and managers in the day-to-day. But at HYAS, we're small enough to where that investment in the employees and the objective of the company have to really go in hand in order for us to be successful. So once our senior leaders started to look at where our objectives were going and the company's strategy, they quickly got on board with the fact that we had to also be able to communicate those objectives in a tangible way to employees and managers so that they could see themselves on track with what we needed to do for all of us to be successful.
Okay. I know one of the things you pointed out to me was being transparent on expectations. So how did you go about doing that?
So that's always tough, because when you're in any size company, there are certain levels that of transparency that just isn't for the frontline individual per se. But in terms of transparency, what we recognized was the more people knew about what we were trying to achieve, the more they could ask questions around how their roles fit into those spaces and how they could help. And then they also saw situations where they could raise their hand and say, hey, I know this may not be my particular job, but I have that skill set, and I'm going to step up and fit in so that we can continue to progress. And so transparency, just like everything else, has been an evolution for us. What do we need to share to make sure people are engaged, so that they know what their value is to the company, and have them feel encouraged enough to raise their hands even in those situations where maybe they don't have the perfect skill set for it, but they have the desire and the willingness to learn and to try. We have a saying at HYAS, we want to fail fast so that we can pick ourselves up and continue.
What about feedback loops? How did you manage that?
Well, when it comes to feedback, it has to be a two-way street, right? In normal or traditional settings, a manager gives employees feedback, and then so it's one way, and then the employee has to take that feedback and do what with it. We've created an environment where it's a give and take. So in addition to having like a 360 view where peers can give feedback to one another, we've created an environment where we're doing quarterly feedback sessions with our employees. In addition to that, they have regular one-on-one meetings with their managers to talk about whether it's the day-to-day work, short-term or long-term goals they may have, but also the employee has the opportunity to say, this is how I need feedback, or when you gave me this, I wasn't clear, or I need more support here or there, so that the manager also gets to understand how the employee receives feedback and what they need so that they can be successful.
One thing I'm interested in is how did you balance the challenge of on-site workers where you were able to see them face to face versus remote workers?
Right. So HYAS is a fully remote company. That's always been its model. And I know a lot of companies had that tough transition, especially during COVID, from moving folks into the office, out of the office face to face into their homes. So that was one thing we had going for us, so to speak. But you have to recognize that relationships, excuse me, typically are born out of people being face to face. So rather than us being exclusively remote, we do have work groups and offsites, and we even do an annual retreat with our employees to talk about, the year's planning and how the year has gone. Because it's when we have those opportunities to get together that those bonds are formed and we become three-dimensional and not just two-dimensional. And that helps us, that builds the glue really between us, so that, for example, well, I see Tiara all the time, but I only know Tiara on a box, right, or on the screen. But when I get a chance to meet Tiara in person and spend a little bit of time with her, I can tell if she's off for that day or if an issue is urgent. And I like to say that gives us the ability to provide each other with grace of knowing how you show up, where you need supports, etc. And that's what we continue to do.
That's the thing that in the time I've known you, you've always struck me as being authentic, which I think must be a key factor in gaining that trust and buy-in from employees. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you can only be yourself, right? And in my position, I have the ear of all of the employees as well as the ear of senior leadership. There has to be a sacred space where folks can come together and express their concerns or ask questions without reprisals or negative thoughts behind it. And when I have to turn around and share that information with our leaders here at HYAS, I make sure that I respect the information that I've received or concerns, so that it isn't betraying the trust of the employees, but making sure that our leaders understand what the pulse of our employees are and steer them towards the direction of resolving issues, or even coming back with surveys and asking individuals what they think and how they feel about it, so that it is more of a holistic approach.
Oh, fantastic. Now, you mentioned to me as well about taking a development-oriented approach. How does that work?
So that, I would say, is probably one of the hardest things for us to accomplish when you're in this at HYAS in terms of being a startup. We're a small staff, and development comes at a price. We have to make sure that folks have the things and the tools that they need to do their jobs, but also we have to look at how can we develop folks' skill sets within this small environment of limited employees. We're all wearing multiple hats. So this is something that continues to be a work in progress for us. We've just started looking into, as I had said, we allow people to raise their hand and say, hey, I'd like to take that on. one of the things I tell people when we go through the interview process is that we want you to bring your whole self to the job, right? It's You're welcome to say, hey, I'm interested in doing this and I'd like to be able to do more of it. And when those opportunities come along, we put them out there and encourage people, to try their hand at it. I would like to see us evolve into a more formal development process, but for now, given our size and what we have to accomplish, we're doing it in a way that makes sense for us.
Okay. I might have discussed this with you in the past, but one of the main elements of, I guess, of insight we've seen in the market around, say, Gen Z,
Mhm.
millennials, is a key priority for them now is, and this is what we're seeing and what we're getting told, and it does align in many areas, but a key priority over salary, benefits, anything else is, what are my development opportunities? Because
Mhm.
in that post-COVID world where maybe people are thinking more about my enjoyment of life rather than my career,
Yeah.
um, is about, well, if I'm going to commit my waking hours to focusing on your organization, what's my development path? What does that
Mhm.
look like? And how real is it? That's probably one of the biggest factors we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months, more so as the market has softened in the last 6 months and maybe some of the crazy salaries and the
Mhm.
post-COVID boom has settled. It's
Mhm.
a big factor. And I've experienced that myself here with my own business. What did you see a similar thing at HYAS? And if so, how have you handled that?
Well, I'm happy to say that um, it all starts with that initial process of who you're hiring, making sure that you align the people or the candidates that want to come and join your company with the company's goals, and make sure that their goals align with what we do. We have the benefit of being a company that I don't think anyone could disagree with. We're in the cybersecurity business, protecting folks, and everyone that works for us has either had a cybersecurity breach or something that has touched their lives, whether it be themselves or a family member, or a loved one. And when you have an objective of making the world a little bit of a safer place, that's a good foundation to start with. The other thing takes us back to transparency. We are upfront about where we're at as a company, what we're looking for, and the skills that we need, and our opportunities that we have for individuals to grow inside of the company. So at no time is someone in a box where they're just slogging away during their day-to-day and not know what's going on. That, I think, makes all the difference in the world. Hey, Gen Z and millennials, they aren't from our generation, let's face it, Giles. And yes, they do have a lot more opportunities, and they're not used to, committing and saying, I'm going to stay at this company for 30 years and wait for the gold watch. They're looking for those opportunities to expand and grow their careers. But if you get a combination of how they can increase their skill sets, but also their values. Their values are very important to them. And if you are um, entrenched in showing them that your values, the company's values, align with their values, you've got a better chance of having those employees stay. We have employees at HYAS, I'm very proud to say, that have been with HYAS since the beginning. So it's great to have those legacy employees and then new folks come on and see the two coalesce, and how they bring in that new life and the different mentalities from the different generations. But also, we're a family at HYAS, and we really try to keep that at the front of what we do, so that everyone feels loved and cared for, in addition to supported in their career objectives. That's not to say that if someone, finds that it's not the right groove for them, then we help them to figure out what's next in their career plan. And there's no hard feelings. It's just, it just doesn't work out.
Yeah, no, great. I like that, making the world a safer place kind of underlying mission
Mhm.
is pretty strong. It's a clear motivator as well. So I like that. It's pretty good. What about recognition and giving appreciation? How do you do that in a fully remote, rapidly growing organization? That must be hard.
Yeah, that's totally fair. We've done all kinds of different things. Like I had mentioned to you before, and I think this is really critical. Even in a fully remote, as in 9 to 5, day-to-day operation, you still have to make those efforts to bring people together, which is what we do with offsites, with our sales kickoffs. And then we also have an annual all-hands meeting for all employees to come together in one location and spend 4 or 5 days, not only learning about what's next in the company or the direction the company may be going for that year, but also to spend time together as individuals and get to know each other in downtime. So those are things we do. We have recognition just like any other company. We'll have milestone anniversaries, awards for different types of things individuals do, but we've also done things like remote, what do you call those rooms? I can't think of the name of them now. The rooms where you can, Giles, I can't think of the name of them, but there are some kind of rooms where you can go and do different scenarios together as a group. I can't
I
think
like
of
escape rooms.
escape rooms. Thank you. Those escape rooms. We've even done remote escape rooms. And let me just tell you, doing those online is hysterical. We've had so much
Imagine.
fun with that and build that camaraderie around those opportunities. We also utilize technology such as Slack to keep ourselves connected on a regular basis. We have all different kinds of Slack groups, whether it's for different projects that individuals are creating or working on, or it's the communication channels that come general from the company, or just fun channels even within the group. We started what we call our social distancing channel, which is kind of ironic since we're fully remote during COVID, just to have a place where people could share what's happening in their corner of the world during that kind of tough time for the world, really.
And I know you've said to me in the past the importance of being data-driven with your insights around performance. How do you manage that currently?
Yes. So it's critical to know, for everyone to know, the employee, the manager, and then even senior leadership, what our expectations are and how we measure ourselves against them. Are we hitting those targets, whether it would be sales goals or even with engineering and product improvements as we go forward? What we do is when we do our performance reviews, in addition to a self-assessment that an individual has, and then there's the manager assessment, and there's also opportunities for feedback in kind of a 360, or I would say a semi-360 view, so that folks know how they're showing up for each other, how they're producing towards their daily objectives, their monthly and yearly objectives, and how that aligns with the company. We use a software platform that helps our people stay engaged along the way, whether they're setting up short-term goals and targets or long-term goals and targets. And when we do our performance reviews, we measure the outcomes against those goals.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you've got that quite tight on that, which is good. I can't think of anything else I've seen anywhere else done significantly better than that.
No, I think it's pretty standard. HR has been around forever. And I think we as an industry, we have grown a lot and we've learned more about how people see themselves and see work. And there was a time where there was this huge disconnect between what a company was actually doing and what the individual employee's part in it all was. There just wasn't that connection. HR has evolved and grown, and it has come to help companies recognize that those employees are critical to your success, so it only makes sense to help make those employees successful as well. There are so many data programs out there, and one that I'm really curious about, I don't know it very well just yet, is called Pando. Have you heard of it?
No, it's a new one for me.
Yeah, so Pando is a data-driven platform as well, similar to a 15.5 or a Lattice or even a Bamboo HR, but it's got some unique features that I'm very interested in. They do away with performance reviews altogether in favor of continuous feedback, which is something that we do at HYAS organically, but they actually have the platform model for it. And one of the things that I am especially curious about is they've got a DE&I component so that you can avoid, the recency bias or any other type of bias, whether it be pay or gender, etc. And they bake that into their program. And so, yeah, Pando, if you're out there, call me. I'm curious.
I will have a look at that.
Yeah.
One thing I've observed, I guess, in my own experiences leading a team and with clients is that with improvement in performance with individuals, it's never a linear process. It tends to come in steps.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you work it if you've got someone that they've got the potential, but they're struggling to capitalize on it for whatever reasons, and maybe they're struggling a bit. How do you what strategies do you employ with that?
So I think the first thing that has to be done is a conversation with that employee, with their manager around what are their objectives? What's causing the disconnect? Is it something that isn't obvious, right? People often think that, work is done in a vacuum, but it could be something completely unrelated that's causing them to not be able to make those progressive changes. So really drilling into that and finding out. And maybe sometimes it's just they need supports that have nothing to do with work so that they can focus back and get themselves back on track. Other times it could be an issue of maybe they simply don't have the capacity that you would initially have thought that they had, or the ability to do those things, or even the interest. You have to, again, we talk about transparency and expectations. You really have to have those honest conversations. And by all means, you have to invest the time and support in the individual and let them know and make it a partnership between the two of you, so that if you're looking at a situation where, okay, this isn't going to be a right fit, what other opportunities are there? If it's a good, solid worker, but they're just not right in that role, if there aren't roles available for them, that's one conversation. But perhaps there are other things that this individual can contribute because they've shown themselves to be worthy of that consideration that you should explore.
Yeah, okay. I think one thing I've mentioned to you on one measurement that we've looked hard at in the last 6 months is how much do you care about your
Absolutely.
role, your personal development, and your environment, your work environment. And that's been a really interesting one for us because, again, we ourselves had instances where people could be quite good at going through the motions. They could go through performance reviews. Outwardly, it looked like everything was working, but inwardly, you weren't seeing the results. We weren't seeing the
Right.
commitment.
Right.
And I think, like many organizations, I imagine HYAS are the same. Lots of organizations having to pivot to varying degrees in the last 6 or 12 months as the market shifted. And that kind of highlighted to me, I think, those who really didn't care too much about themselves or what they were doing were getting caught out and were suddenly finding themselves on the outside of the circle for where things were heading. And that's been an interesting one for me with performance management. I had to make some pretty tough calls in that case, but equally it worked well from a performance management perspective of seeing those who were really bought in.
Right.
And how do you, I mean, in terms of, I guess, from your process, are there any other metrics you look at like that? I mean, the one of measuring the extent to which someone cares, there isn't a scale out there. There
No, there
isn't,
is. There isn't.
it's an entirely subjective measure and it can
Yep.
change day to day, week to week, depending where someone's at.
Right.
Is there anything else you look at similar to that in your role?
From my vantage point, one of the things I do every week is I have what I call coffee breaks. I can have coffee breaks with literally everyone in the company. And that's a time that I spend with that individual just to check in on how they're doing. It could be, like I said, it could be something completely unrelated to work where they need additional supports, right? Or it could be a conflict that they're having either within their group or with their manager, or misunderstandings. Hearing them out, offering them supports, encouraging them to talk to their manager, and even in some cases, depending on what it is, going to the manager and saying, okay, this is what's happening and we need to work this out. again, I'm going to go back to transparency, because I think oftentimes people aren't transparent, or dare I say, upfront about what they're feeling and what they're thinking. Giles, the reality is we all must work. We all need to have a job, right? And, you know, there have been times in my career where I've thought, okay, I just need to get through this. I can perform to the expectation of the employer. My heart isn't here, but this is what I can do to go forward. And when you have those opportunities where people come to you and say, hey, you just seem off, or your heart doesn't seem to be in this, talk to them. I don't know why that's such a taboo anymore. Talking to individuals and finding out where they're at. And if they're disengaged, if you can't get them to come back around, then you have to have those difficult conversations. And sometimes they're relieved for it. I've had a couple of situations, in fact, where people have thanked me for helping them to realize that it wasn't the right opportunity for them. And they've come back and said, boy, that was the best thing I ever did. Leaving that entity, now I'm happy. Now I'm doing what I love. And I appreciate the fact that you didn't sugarcoat it for me, but you helped me to see that that's where I should go. Again, that authenticity, that honesty with folks, learning who they are, knowing that they can come to you, having them know that they can come to you and create a safe space where they can talk about what their objectives are, their goals, or any issues that they may have, makes a difference. Now, if you're a company of thousands of people, probably not the easiest thing to do, but that's where you really have to lean into your managers. Oftentimes, companies seem to have managers that can manage a group of people doing a process, but perhaps they don't have the ability to see those emotional types of effects that the day-to-day may have on their employees. Really partnering those managers with their human resources and taking advantage of all the other types of services that a company may provide, such as EAP, for example, can help bring those things closer together.
It's a good point, that authenticity, clarity, and safety, definitely three elements that I know have been a consistent theme in what you've spoken about. And I can see, even, I know we've spoken lots over time, but as you go through it, I can see why it works so well. The bit that interests me at the minute, I think will be is a challenge, but a good one for many employers who are pivoting. We're pivoting. I know most of my clients are. They're new markets, new strategies, new challenges, reinforcing their sales approach. Lots of different things, is the demands that places on individuals, new performance goals, and that can come around quite suddenly, quite quickly. But I think what we found, and I guess the companies I've seen are doing well, is they build in excitement from that, and a renewed focus on excitement, and come and be part of this journey. And I guess for us, that ties back to that. That's where you can tell when someone really cares about where they're going, if they're happy to try that new shift. Have you found that from adapting your performance management, where maybe leadership is setting you new goals, new directions, either at HYAS or in previous places you've worked? How have you handled that?
Okay, so again, communication and transparency. There have been times where things change, you change in the middle of the stream. The landscape has changed so much for technology, and cybersecurity is growing by leaps and bounds. And sometimes we have to pivot to adjust to what's happening within the marketplace. We talk to our people. We're honest with them about what's happening and where we're going. And if we have to make these shifts, we have to work within each one of our work groups, whether it's our go-to-market team or our engineering, to say, hey, now we have to make these shifts. See, the whole thing about technology, in my opinion, and for the record, I am not that technical, but it's the fluidity and the flexibility. You have to, when you're looking at individuals that are going to work, even if they're fantastic coders, if they're not capable of being flexible and being able to be adaptable, then they're not going to be successful in their role. So choosing to hire someone like that, because man, can that person code, is going to set them up for failure and the company for a setback. So you really, again, have to drill into, who are you looking at to hire? What is it? What are their skill sets? What are their goals? And can they adapt in environments? One of the things our CEO always asks folks when he's doing interviews is, tell me a time when you failed. That's a real key indicator for him. If folks can't think about a time that they failed and they how they recovered from it, then there's something missing in their growth process. Because let's face it, we all fail. We all have to get back on the horse and figure things out and go forward. And so when we do our screenings, and Giles, we've worked together and we've had some really great folks come out of our collaboration. We make sure that they understand what we're all about, what we need from them. They have to have that ability to be flexible, especially in a startup, because it's not like a traditional work environment. People often think that a startup is, woohoo, we wear jeans and we drink beer in the office. Or we're working in a garage, but it really isn't that. A startup isn't intended to always be that. There was the time for that, I'm sure, at the very beginnings, right? But as you grow and mature and your place in the marketplace becomes more visible, well, you have to show up in the right way. And so there are employees that are great for a time, and there are employees that can carry you through to the finish line. So knowing the difference and being clear on what you need and communicating that and choosing wisely is best for everyone.
No, that's a great point. As you say, having the right people for the right time. And that's, I guess, with elections this year, both sides of the pond for us, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of people holding their breath, seeing what's happening. And that can be hard for employees with that lack of clarity. A lot of news about layoffs, all that kind of turbulence around it. It's difficult, I guess, keeping that clarity and keeping that focus in the middle of all of that. As you know, I guess I've been doing a lot of work recently with different individuals to help them sharpen their resumes and their skills and their focus to get into either back into work or into something more suitable. And one thing I guess I've noticed is people's confidence has taken a hit across the board, which is probably the most surprising thing for me. But what was interesting and I'm kind of doing these micro performance management sessions with people, and many of them have been out of work for 4, 6, 8 weeks, maybe a bit longer, is the confidence element and how quickly you can get that rebuilt and refocused. And even with a couple of degrees shift in direction, you get someone suddenly flying again. I mean, have you got any, obviously anonymously, but what will be your kind of success stories that stick in your mind? I mean, I know you mentioned you've had a few people where you've said, this isn't for you, but that could be, and they've come back to you and said, wow, thanks for that. Any kind of major success stories that stick in mind for you?
Let me see. Yeah, there was one young man who really liked him a lot. He was a very hard worker. He'd come in every day with a smile on his face, and this was in an office environment, but you could just sense that something was lacking for him. And when I would do performance reviews with him, I would say, you always meets expectations. How does that feel for you? And he was honest about the fact that it's just not enough interest for him to go and exceed expectations. And I'd ask him, don't you want to exceed expectations? Or in what environment would you be able to say, I'm exceeding expectations? Turns out he wanted to be a chef. And I said, you want to be a chef? Yeah. I think about cooking all day long. I think about what I'm going to make for dinner. I think about family holidays, etc. And that's where his love was. I was like, well, that's really interesting. But he didn't have an environment outside of just his family where he was showing these gifts, right? So I was like, that's really interesting. Every year the company has these events that they put on for employees. Would you be interested in preparing some dishes and seeing if you could be a part of that? She's like, you do that for me? It's like, absolutely, I do that for you. What do you have to lose? His enthusiasm shot through the roof. because even though the work that he did wasn't what his heart spoke to, the fact that I saw him, the fact that the company had, who knew, a vehicle where his other talents could shine, helped him to turn his whole perspective around. He thought that he could only do his job, but he was able to pursue his passion within the company and get recognition for these amazing skills that he had in addition to being able to do his job. The next time he had a performance review, he exceeded expectations. And it wasn't because of some miracle cure. It was because he felt seen. He felt that if this company can invest in the things that speak to my heart, I can invest in the company's objectives and I can do better. And sometimes it's just that simple.
It's awesome. And there's no cost to do that.
Not at
There's
all.
no, I
Nothing.
mean, it's no
Just being
training
there.
or extra salary or.
Nope. And at the end of the year, when awards got passed out, we would give him an award for the different parades, because it was a municipal job, or things that he showed up at and did the different food dishes. And because it was municipal, there were all different kinds of ethnicities and communities that were celebrated, and he was always there being challenged. Oh, I can make Indian food, or I can do this, or I can do that. And it really spoke to him. He really felt like a whole person in that environment, and he loved his job.
That's really cool. I'd be interested to know if that had like an osmosis effect on others in the team, because we get this. You get, you can sense if someone in the team's struggling, and often if the rest of the team like them, there is a feeling of like, okay, what's going to happen with them? And often they're willing that person to
Yep.
turn the corner, but it doesn't always happen. So did you see a bump or a lift in others around that same team from that person finding their mojo?
We absolutely did. We saw not only a lift in how people showed up for themselves, but in the camaraderie of encouraging him to go forward and do it. And hey, you're going to be doing this for this group. I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to show up. I would have to go to all of them, and I would see the groups of his teammates showing up and cheering him on. And this was in Chicago, where there's lots of activity around these kinds of things. And they'd say, hey, you're going to be at this. I'm going to show up and bring my family. And it was just, again, he was seen, he was supported, people cared, and that made all the difference. The problem, I think, oftentimes is we all work because we have to, as I said, but you work sometimes because you're driven and you love what you do, even if it's not successful. But if you're not in a bubble all alone and no one sees you or your efforts, then you become smaller and smaller and smaller. Being able to be yourself and see how your contributions affect other people, and that you are needed, and that every day folks look for you, it makes a difference. It makes a difference in all our lives. And when you go back to COVID and think about the isolation that folks felt, some of the emotional damage that came out of that, it was truly because of the fact that people couldn't connect. That human connection is so important to us. And whether we're able to make it directly by folks working in an office together, or indirectly through the use of technology or the opportunities to have these offsites, help people feel stronger and seen and cared for. Even if it's not a great conversation, just being able to have that makes a difference. We'll never be able to get away from a human connection, in my opinion, no matter what technology brings us to make our lives easier.
It's great to hear, and I can see how you've made it work, because in a fully remote organization, I imagine you've got to work that much harder to stay on it, to
Absolutely.
be watching, be observing, be sensing. You've not got the able to see body language scenarios in an office environment, so much harder. There's an interesting thing you mentioned earlier about the young gentleman you mentioned with the chef, which is an awesome story, by the way, really cool, was someone you really liked. And I've seen this a lot, and we've suffered from this in performance management, is an employee you really like, but they're just not cutting it. And for whatever reason, they've not got the talent, the commitment, they don't care enough, but you really like them and you're willing them to succeed. And I've been guilty of this. And you run it too long, and it's just
Oh,
not going to happen.
yeah.
How how do you kind of cater for that, or is it just something that is just it's a bit of a pitfall for any HR manager or line manager?
Yeah. I think you got to stop the bleeding. It sounds
Mm.
so tough to say, but the way I look at it is it's not working for the company, and it's truly not working for them either. Right. And the longer you can't drag those situations out, it starts to blow back on the rest of the organization,
Mm.
because somebody somewhere or someone's somewheres is picking up the slack.
Yeah,
And that could be really detrimental to the overall morale of all the folks in the company.
yeah.
So,
It's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to it's difficult to monitor and see.
yep, the
Um,
expectation of them is that you do something. Don't
yeah,
you see? Sam is not showing up every day. I'm working later because Sam didn't do this or that. They become resentful, and then you've got quite a larger issue on your hands. So
yeah,
really trying to minimize that, trying to put in that effort to turn it around. And if it just isn't going to work, then you have to follow those steps and agree to part ways. And that's really important, because the people that stay behind will say, well, how am I treated? Or,
yeah.
well, I don't have to do anything, right? All I have to do is show up. Sam did it for 5 years. So you have to really be mindful of that.
That's a great point. There was another, going back to your chef analogy, another bit you touched on was interesting is when you did, they were involved in, as you say, various things in Chicago, the family were there. And
Mhm.
that's a really interesting point I found in performance management is, and it can be a difficult thing to do, is finding and asking about partners, family,
Mhm.
children, what's going on in their lives. And again, it's not something you can suddenly interview them on.
Right.
It's been able to ask about that and be aware of it and be sensitive to it. And I found that's probably given me some of the biggest insights, because I think people are normally coming into work, not really talk about those things.
Yep.
Um, Being able to draw that out, and I've uncovered a raft of various things that can be going on in people's lives, which give complete context to why they're struggling and why
Yep.
things aren't gelling. Some you can influence, some you can't, but
Mhm.
being aware of it is often a key. And I found the biggest thing is sometimes people just like the fact they can acknowledge it with you.
That's
I'm
right.
dealing with some stuff and it's cool. If I need help, I'll put my hand up, but I'm going to crack on.
Mhm.
And so that I found that from a performance management perspective has been quite powerful, has worked quite well. Do you see the same thing?
I absolutely see the same thing. When folks turn a blind eye to someone clearly struggling for whatever it is that they're struggling, it just deflates that individual and makes them go even further inward. Just asking the question, how are you doing? And I'm in the unenviable position of, I don't have an agenda. They don't work for me, right? I don't have expectations around what their day-to-day work product is. I'm there to make sure that they have that support, that things are going in the way that they should, or running in the way that they should. And if we need to make changes within our organization, I work with our senior leadership to make that happen. So when I ask someone, how are you doing? I notice X, Y, or Z. One, they know that I'm not coming with an agenda and that I'm genuinely asking. And two, they also know that I'm going to do whatever I can to help if they want my help, right?
Yeah,
And providing those resources if it's not something that I can do. But it's more than just the ask, I think, Giles. It's the follow-up that makes the difference. Hey,
yeah,
I noticed when we have our Zoom calls, when it's company wide and everyone's engaged, I pay attention to how folks are showing up in those Zoom calls. They all know this, so it's not a secret, right? See, is someone, distracted? Is someone checked out? And then I'll reach out to them. Is everything okay? I saw that you kind of not didn't seem like yourself. You want to talk about it? Like I said,
yeah,
those coffee breaks that I do on a regular basis with our employees are invaluable, because that gives us the ability to see them. And whether it's something I can help them solve, or something that I can point them in the right direction, or even need to get their managers involved to work through. Not letting people feel isolated and alone is so important. And I'll give you a perfect example, a personal example. I guess it was last week that we had to say goodbye to our dog, and it was very traumatizing. And you know me, Giles, I sent my boss a message and I said, so I've been at the vet all evening and I'm here this morning. And so we have to say goodbye to our dog today, but I'll be there for our 1 o'clock meeting. That's typical Tiara, right? And he said, okay, take your time, take all the time you need. And as my day went on, and I found myself apologizing to more people that I couldn't meet with because I just couldn't emotionally show up in a way that I like to, because, you know, I was grieving the loss of my dog. So the next day I'm back at the desk. I'm on a meeting with several people, including my boss. And, you know, it was the usual reporting on different things. Afterwards, my boss gave me a phone call and he said, are you sure you're okay? Because even though you gave information, etc., I just got a sense that something was still on your heart. Is there anything, he said, besides Louie, my dog, besides Louie passing away, is there anything else that's bothering you that you'd like to talk about? It's that type of attention to your employees, even in those small moments like losing a pet. Not a small moment to be sure, but he was aware of his employee, and he did that for me.
That attention to detail is key. But there's a flip side, which is interesting, and I think it's something I'd recommend to employees, and it can be hard to, I guess, comprehend and grip. But the flip side for underperformers who are never going to work out, and I've seen this in terms of that compassion and interest in their personal interests can be taken advantage of. And I do think with the market the way it is at the minute, and I know we've spoken about a prevalence of fake candidates out there at the moment. It's a big, big problem. We're seeing it regularly. Is equally problems with employees maybe not being as honest as they should. And man, I've seen it all. I've seen it all in terms of the stories I've had. That attention to detail as well, and in terms of knowing when there's irregularities in what you're being told and what the patterns are, can be quite important. I've had to move on a few people on that basis, that we thought something's not right and the pattern doesn't fit. And that's been quite useful. So one thing I would stress is, clearly we all want it from a positive perspective,
100%.
but that attention to detail and knowing contextual elements is just as important when things really aren't going well and aren't going to improve. And maybe that person is not the right one for your organization.
Yeah, you know, that's so true. And of course, I always try to see things positively. One of the things, I think you know this about me, Giles, that I used to work in corrections. So I was the director of programs and administration for a 10,000 population of inmates. So these were pretrial detainees. And a big part of my job was to make sure that they didn't lose their rights while they were incarcerated because they hadn't been convicted. Yeah. And I learned a lot. I learned so much about human nature and the experience of folks, how people can manipulate situations and show up with a facade when they really have, you know, another agenda. And I could say that it's my experience that helps me do this for HYAS, and maybe that's one of the reasons they hired me. But you can't walk around with rose-colored glasses on, right? The best that you can do in these situations is do everything that you can to support someone. And let's face it, there are laws that say you must do X, Y, or Z if you're going to be walking someone out the door. You have to do these in a certain way. And it also depends on what state they're in. Heaven forbid it's California, for example. There are a lot of protectives for employees, even those employees who don't show up in the best way. But if you follow a process, if you're consistent, the consistency is key for the people that stay at your company, and you're consistent in how you walk people out, not belaboring that process, then it's the right thing to do. And, oftentimes there have been debates through various points in my career of whether or not you announce to the rest of the company, for example, that someone has left, right? And some would argue that it's a security issue. You want to let them know that someone's gone. So if you see them in the office picking up stuff, they shouldn't be there, right? Or if they're a part of a work group, okay, so now someone has to pick up the slack on that work, right? And all the work has to be redistributed. Communicating to folks, your employees know who should go.
Yeah.
And they're watching to see what you do.
Yeah.
So you really have to balance that out in an equitable way. And then you've got to go back inside to the folks that are still there saying, okay, wow, that person's gone. Now let's talk about this workload, because you can't dismiss the fact that there's still work to be done while you have that gap. So it's that continuous communication. It's that not belaboring the exit of someone who just isn't right for the company for whatever reason. And it's supporting the people that are left behind that have to pick up the slack in the interim so that you can continue to do the things and meet the objectives that the company has set.
I think if you've got a good core culture, good processes, the right people leading, I think the environment bounces back incredibly quickly. We've seen that. Whenever I've had to exit someone, almost immediately, the rest of the team have gone, yeah, we saw it coming.
Yep,
And
100%. They know before you do.
Yeah. And the team takes a big breath and we move on. And the next day it's all forgotten about. And I think in 95% of the cases, that's been the way it's worked. And it's difficult because as a HR professional, HR leader, it's stressful, isn't it? I mean, it's not an easy thing. You can't, you can't go through it without any compassion or feeling. And it's interesting. I'd forgotten about your corrections background, and that's interesting. That probably, I'd imagine, in a large way, shapes that style and approach that you've got, as you say, of always trying to look at the positives, which is hard. It's difficult when you see some scenarios. Man, it's hard.
It's very hard, but consider the alternative. I mean, do you want to walk around your office or your screen going, oh, well, I can't expect Tiara to get that done today. Giles is only going to come through semi-sorta, and I'm still going to have to work late to pick this up. And oh, I've got all this. You drive yourself crazy. Right?
It's a great point. It's a great point because I think many organizations are having a tough time at the minute. I know, ourselves, I know many in the staffing industry, everyone's feeling the pain, and it would be easy to just go, this is too hard, and take a negative standpoint. So I think it's a great point to talk on. And I think also the importance of having that tight performance management strategy. I think it is all about process, consistent processes. So no matter what changes out there, you've got a good process to go back to.
Right. And that process becomes stability. It becomes stability for your employees because you're not changing that. Even if the work has to change, even if the objectives have to change, you still have a process for measuring them and supporting them with the work. And the rest is going to come to the surface, and you'll have to deal with that to be sure. But being consistent makes all the difference in the world. I think as human beings, we like consistency, right? I get up at 5 a.m. every day. I do this and that. First, I have to feed the cat because, otherwise she'd be miserable and drive me crazy all day. But that consistency, that knowing what you're walking into, no one likes to walk in and be blindsided every single day, because what does that do? It causes anxiety. And when you're anxious, you're not going to perform at your best. So knowing that these are the goals that I have, these are the targets my group is reaching for, and this is how they support the company's goals, and this is my part in that, makes all the difference. My team can depend on me. Or I've got issues, I've got something going on, I don't want to talk about it, and I'm not showing up. That's when managers have to be aware of their employees and address those issues, or lean into HR for supports. HR's job is to support the employees and the company's objective and try very hard to make them one. When you think about that. And sometimes it works. Most of the time it does, thankfully, but sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of peaked with all my questions at the minute. Is there anything we've not covered that you wanted to talk about?
Let's see. Giles, I think we've pretty much covered it all. Well, let's talk about DE&I for a moment. This became a big surge in the last few years because I think the whole trauma that was happening with the whole Black Lives Matters campaign and all these other things that we saw throughout the US and other places too, I'm sure. And when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, people are all over the spectrum about it, right? And you're seeing laws being changed in the US around what they're teaching in the schools around these subjects, etc. But how is it affecting employees, or how is it affecting the workforce or corporations even? The large corporations have the luxury of being able to say, okay, we're going to bring in a DE&I professional and we're going to look at what we're doing and we're going to come up with a process that really helps create equity among our employees, whether it's in opportunities for advancement, opportunities to even work on projects, or even pay. But when you talk about small companies, such as HYAS, how does DE&I show up? So that's the last thing I'll share with you today. So for HYAS, diversity, equity, and inclusion isn't about the color of your skin, isn't about where you came from. It's seeing an individual for who they are, regardless of all of that, and embracing that and allowing them to be themselves in that environment, and supporting them with their goals and aligning them with the company's goals so that everyone can be successful. I think too often we spend time kind of encapsulating it as it's one culture, or it's one color, or it's this or that. At the end of the day, we're all human beings.
Yeah.
And we all want to be treated decently. And I think for us at HYAS, that's what we believe, and that's how we treat people, regardless.
Well, I think that's spot on. And I think tech is a great sector for that diversity, because if you've got skills and you've got the attitude, you can get the job, and there's huge potential out there. And we see that with what we do on our sourcing end of the spectrum. I don't care. If you've got the skills my client wants, and you've got the right attitude, and let's go. So yeah, I think that's a great thing with tech, and especially, I guess, younger, faster paced companies like HYAS and many of the clients we deal with, they're quite, I guess, very progressive in their outlook, and open to all different approaches. I mean, I've got clients that work on an asynchronous manner where all employees just work whatever hours they want. I've got managers that work, literally, will work to 2 or 3 a.m. Work from 5 p.m. till 2 a.m. because that's what I want to do. And my team work whenever. And so I guess in my time, working US and UK, I've not come across, I think, that many companies where I think, man, you've got a problem. We need to open this up with you.
Exactly.
If anything, most of the ones I'm dealing with, particularly in that maybe sub 500 employee, fast pace, fast growth, they're very open, very progressive. So yeah, but I think it's tech is just a good place to be for this. I think. I can't comment on other areas, but in tech, I think it's moving along okay.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. Well, Tiara, it's been fantastic. I'm sure we could keep going for another hour, as we normally do, but we've covered a lot of ground. But I think that sincerity, authenticity, honesty, I think is fantastic and clearly comes through in your approach. And I can see why it's a big factor. I'd love to do another session on your corrections insights and how that shaped some of your approach. I think that would be a whole other hour, but I think that's obviously a big component of what makes you so successful in this role. But thank you very much for sharing this. And I look forward to catching up with you in the next few weeks in Austin.
Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in Austin, Giles.
Thanks, Tiara.
Bye-bye.